op-ed today that I published over at HartmannReport.com. My daily take is titled, "Does Fox News Merit Criminal Prosecution for Sedition or Reckless Endangerment?" And, you know, there's this doctrine in American law that came out of, part of it came out of the New York Times v. Sullivan, but, a lot of it goes back to the 1920s, actually, that the First Amendment is solid, relatively speaking. In other words, you can say pretty much anything, unless you are intentionally defaming a person with the malicious intent to harm them, or if you are saying something that is putting the lives of other people in danger and actually, typically, and actually produces a consequence. The old, yelling fire in a crowded theater sort of thing. And now we have learned, or at least it is alleged by Dominion voting systems, that basically the entire Fox News system, from Rupert at the very top through his son Lachlan, all the way down through management to the individual hosts on the air, all agreed that Donald Trump lost the election, that Joe Biden was the legitimately elected president, and then decided to go on a 9-week binge leading up to January 6th, which for many of the shows continues to this day, of lying about that and claiming that, oh, no, in fact, Democrats stole the election from these wonderful Republicans. Is that something for which they should be criminally prosecuted? After all, 5 people died that day, and the following day a police officer died of his injury, and 2 more police officers died in the following week or so from their injuries, according to their families. So this goes beyond just the yelling fire in a crowded theater. This goes to the yelling fire in a crowded theater that leads to the stampede that leads to people getting trampled, which in fact is how one of the people on January 6th died. Well, here's where it gets problematic. Here in the United States, we have had 2 very shameful episodes in the history of this country where we actively prosecuted, our federal government actively prosecuted news reporters, news publications, and politicians for political speech. You can argue, how reprehensible or not the political speech was at the time. I would say in both cases, it's nowhere near as bad as what's happening right now, but still political speech. One was Woodrow Wilson during World War I, and leading up to World War I, got the, a revised version of the Alien and Sedition Acts passed. And, he sent Eugene Debs, Bernie Sanders' hero, he sent Eugene Debs off to prison for opposing World War I, among others. Wilson was a Democrat, but I've never been a fan of Woodrow Wilson. He was a racist, he was a bigot, he was weird, actually, when you get right down to it. And he dragged us into World War I. I think, well, whether it was necessary or unnecessary is something that historians are still hashing out. So that was the most recent period of time that we did this. The one before that was John Adams, when John Adams was president. Our first president was George Washington, 1787 or 1789, really, until 1796. And then in 1797 or 1796, John Adams was elected president and served a single 4-year term. And then Thomas Jefferson came in with the election of 1800 and became president on March 3rd, 1801 for 8 years. And during John Adams' presidency, during the first 2 years of his presidency, his vice president was Thomas Jefferson. Adams was a conservative. He was a member of the Federalist Party. Jefferson was what you might call a progressive in some ways. Obviously, the terms are, had different meaning 240 years later, but Jefferson was the founder of the Democratic-Republican Party, today known as the Democratic Party. And Adams was very, very upset with the newspapers calling him out. So upset that he got a law passed in 1798 2008, the beginning of the third year of his administration, or the tail end of the second, the aliens, it was a combination of 4 laws, actually, the Alien Sedition Acts, that then allowed him to put people in prison for speaking out against him. The first one that he arrested, in fact, he arrested it the day that he signed the legislation, but before it had even legally gone into effect, was Ben Franklin's grandson, Benjamin Franklin Bach, and threw him into jail, where he died of yellow fever. Actually, I think he got out and died of yellow fever, but in any case, you know, he died before he could even had a trial. John Adams shut down some 20 Democratic Republican newspapers, put over a dozen of their editors and writers in prison. You've heard me tell the story of Luther Baldwin, the guy who, the town drunk of Newark, New Jersey, who made the comment to a Federalist bartender that they were firing the cannons at John Adams, and he didn't mind if they fired him right at him. And Luther ended up in jail for calling the president into disrepute. Or Matthew Lyon, the congressman from Vergennes, Vermont, who John Adams had arrested for alleging that the Federalists only wanted to help rich people, which is pretty amazing because that was pretty much who they were. And even though John Adams wasn't a rich guy himself, he loved hanging out with them and the whole adoration of the public stuff. So, I went through this whole thing in the article, and I encourage you to read it because there's a lot of detail in there that I can't get into in 10 minutes here on the air. But the conclusion that I've come to is that we really need to let the civil processes play out first. Alex Jones's words tortured the families of Sandy Hook, but nobody died as a result of what he said. The deaths had occurred before he said these things. And so he's being sued civilly. And, it may well wipe him out. And that's what Dominion is doing with Fox. They have yet to go after any of the individual hosts, at least to the best of my knowledge. But, they're asking for over $1 billion from Fox. And I'm guessing that if the Dominion lawsuit is successful, that the families of the police officers and many of the other victims of January 6th will then start suing, Fox News and Fox hosts, and, we'll see where that goes. What got me started on all this was over the weekend, one of the former, Glenn Kirshner, the former federal prosecutor, when he retired as a federal prosecutor, he was the head of the homicide division for the D.C. district. And he argued that Fox and their people should actually be criminally investigated and prosecuted. I think it's premature. I'm not ruling it out altogether, but I think it's premature. I think that we need to let the civil process proceed first. Just because once you start putting people in jail, people who are reporters, people who are the press, once you start shutting down press institutions based on criminal law, you are traveling down a very, very dangerous path. Now, I realize I have a dog in this fight, being one of those people in the media, but I think, if anything, that gives me maybe a clearer view of what the stakes are.